Hi everyone, my name is Maya and I'm the CEO and co-founder of Find Me Cure, a company dedicated to bringing research closer to patients. One of my main scope within the last couple of years is working on feasibility by creating like platform called Trial Hub, which is a data cloud supporting decision making within feasibility and patient recruitment. My passion is definitely decentralized clinical trials, and that's one of the reasons why I'm here today with my friends Raymond, Eddie, and Daniel. We actually had several conversations prior to having and recording this discussion, and we united ourselves because we saw that last year, 2019, brought a lot of dynamics in the clinical research space, especially on the topic of decentralized clinical trials. It brought really a lot of uncertainty, and mainly when it comes to research sites and how their future would look like. And we decided to unite our efforts, to unite our know how, and come together and record this discussion so that we can really share our insights, our know how, and our opinions with the entire community. And before giving the word to my friends to present themselves, I want to clarify a few things. First, when we speak about decentralized clinical trials, we actually cover the whole range, fully virtual, half virtual, hybrid. Basically, we know that the majority of clinical trials will be a combination between virtual elements and also at site visits. So this is very key. When we speak about DCT, it's mainly these hybrid trials that I'm now mentioning. And the second thing I wanted to clarify is that what we're sharing with you is basically coming from our experience, from what we know, from our perspectives. So feel free to disagree with our perspective and actually challenge us with your questions. We did our homework, I have to say. When we announced that we are going to record this discussion, we did ask for some questions. So a lot of the questions we are going to cover today are actually thanks to you coming back to us with your questions, and we appreciate that. Throughout the discussion, we will cover 8 main topics, all related to sites, the centralized clinical trials, and all the hypotheses over there. So, with that being said, Edie, the floor is yours, the next lady in the room.
Thank you so much, Maya. Such a great layout for such a great event that we're doing today. So excited to be here. I'm Edie Edens from First Class Solutions, and I act as their senior research compliance consultant. I have the unique pleasure to work with all these wonderful folks in the room today. And as Maya said, we've been preparing a really great talk, including some of your wonderful questions. I want to start off with letting Daniel and Raymond introduce themselves as well, and then I'll circle back and start the scope and the first topic.
Thank you, Edie. I'm excited to be here. Hi, everyone. My name is Daniel. I'm the Chief Operating Officer at Macro Trials, where we are changing the culture of clinical research one trial at a time, and I'm excited to share the floor with these experts here, and I look forward to the stimulating conversation we're getting ready to kick off in.
Thanks. My name is Raymond Omisu. I'm a co-founder and CEO of Clinical Research IO, or CREO. We are a very site-friendly, site-oriented clinical research system that allows sites to collect data electronically, called eSource, file their regulatory binders electronically, that's called e-regulatory, and manage all the back office operations such as scheduling and finance and recruiting, that's called CTMS. I look forward to this discussion because this is very pertinent to a lot of our clients.
Yeah, thanks, guys. And we really wanted to bring folks from different spaces in clinical trial, the clinical trial industry, so that we can have different conversations. We absolutely mean it when we say challenge each other. You're going to see us challenge each other as we get started here. So as Maya was bringing us home with scope, when we're forming this talk and we pick these 8 topics, just to sort of paint the page, set the roadmap here, what we've done is we've really thought about it from the perspective of 3 trial types, if you will, as we progress the 2020 difficult year landscape that it was. One is you have very, very traditional clinical trial setup, all site-centric in terms of having the patient come to a site, right? These were not utilizing hardly any remote modalities or opportunities before 2020, and may or may not have been able to pivot using certain modalities to keep certain trials open, or may have had to pause a lot of their trials, right? The second setting we also considered and thought of in terms of, again, you, the audience, and who we're talking about and tips that we're giving, is the hybrid of, and when I say that, I want to be careful, of individuals who pre-2020 were dipping their toe in the decentralized waters, right? Were exploring what I would call remote modalities, but definitely not to the extent that 2020 then pushed them to adopt or forced them to adopt. And then your third category is individuals who pre-2020, pre-COVID were truly paving the decentralized path. Maybe they weren't there, maybe they weren't 100% virtual. Like we said, that's actually a bit uncommon to be 100% virtual, but they were already there, right? 2020 was not the catalyst. It was merely a time for them to onboard and refine what they were already doing, right? So we were trying to think of those three buckets across this space. And the first topic that we came across was remote feasibility, right? As we're discussing it in this current environment. So Maya and Daniel and Raymond are going to talk here, and I'm going to help moderate the discussion. But to kick it off, I wanted Maya to really paint the scene here because she's authored a really great, if you haven't checked it out, 2-part piece just this last April in 2020 about data sources and feasibility assessment. And she did some very deep work to pull those pieces together. And so I'm really wondering, as you research this process so thoroughly and talk to so many stakeholders, what did you learn as it related to both kind of what we're calling that new reality, that new post-2020, as well as, frankly, what was the optimization that was needed there anyway, right? Like that COVID had nothing to do with, it was always there. So Maya, you want to speak a little?
Yeah, sure. So the two pieces were all about what kind of data sources you can use for optimal feasibility. The reality is that we're with very tight hands. The goal of the feasibility in the end of the day is to answer the question, where can we find the right eligible patients? Like who do we partner with? Where can we find these patients? So in the end of the day, we have a smooth patient recruitment and clinical trial in time in the end of the day. But data sources are quite limited and also tricky to be used in a way, and also very inconsistent when it comes to geographical coverage. So what you would imagine that you will have in the States, it's completely different, let's say in other countries like Germany, in the UK, in Spain, and I'm not even mentioning like some other countries in the APAC region in Latin America. So that was kind of like the big challenge prior to COVID. After COVID, actually COVID didn't bring that much of a challenge for feasibility, but what made it the difference, what brought the difference actually is the decentralized piece of clinical trials, because now to this component, where are the patients and which are these sites that would best suit the protocol and will have the patients with the right profile. Now you have also an additional questions, not only one, but additional questions like, okay, which are these sites that are best fit and equipped to actually work with technologies and provide remote support to patients? How do we actually attract these patients that are not just 100 miles, which is kind of like the maximum distance that you can have for attracting patients close to the site? So it's around 100 miles. So how do we get these sites outside of this 100 miles range? And which are these sites that are better equipped and better positioned? And we call them the champions, basically. So identifying these. But then on the other side, there are also questions like, that's mainly about multinational clinical trials. That's where they mainly struggle. And like today, that's the main question. How do we know that if we go to outside of the States, because the States, like it's pretty well equipped already with technologies, and regulations are a little bit more steady when it comes to decentralized clinical trials, and we'll speak about regulations in a bit. But if you go outside of the States, then it's like, how can I be sure that I can deploy my technology there? Is that existing? Are there enough vendors? Like, which are these vendors that I can rely on? And it's not about just technology. Here we also speak about remote services like nursing solutions, like delivery to drugs, cultural differences. So all of these things brought additional complexity because of the centralized clinical trials.
So it's more like having almost an even broader, the push in 2020 is that you now almost have a broader assessment scope than you did before to see, can you do these DCTs?
Yes, it's just a little bit different. Mm-hmm. I'm pretty confident and very positive that we'll get there. Mm-hmm. It's just that at the moment, it all comes from the fact that we don't have such a big experience with the centralized clinical trials. I mean, if you have and we actually, at Trial Hub, we we launched a database of clinical trials with virtual trial components, and that's something that we constantly work. So when we launched it, that was like middle of 2020, we saw that there are like pretty good number of trials, but then they were exponentially growing as we were going. So if you look at now, there are a lot more. So these are all examples how trials are using virtual trial components, where they are actually using these components, in which countries and which sites are using them. But that's something that comes with experience. So I'm very confident that by the time, let's say by the end of the year, or even before that, we will have a lot more experience to learn from and to actually apply after that to our new clinical trials.
I'm
Yeah,
curious. Oh, go ahead, Raymond.
sorry, go ahead. Well, I was going to say I've talked to some sites who are being very proactive, trying to develop these operational capabilities. So to your point, Maya, that sounds like a different question set. I actually think, Dan, you've been doing that at your site, trying to get out ahead of the curve. Is that something that you found? How have you found that experience?
Well, I think that there's this cookie cutter mentality when it comes down to site feasibility with your questionnaire that sponsors deliver either directly and they deploy it to the sites or via the CRO. And I'd argue that if it's coming via the CRO, the visibility of the site's true capabilities are even more far removed from the sponsor, because you're putting the filter of the CRO. And, you know, I value CROs tremendously. I mean, they play such a critical role. But I do feel that as we talk about decentralized clinical trial operations, one of the things that I would argue and I would challenge the industry is it's not so much about the technical capabilities per se, as much as it is the attitude and culture of the site, and how do you adequately capture that in a site feasibility questionnaire. You know, there's a post that I saw, Simon Sinek, that said, when you hire people, don't hire for skills, hire for attitude. And I think that it's the same mentality and approach that should be applied with site selection, because you may have a site that doesn't have all of the technology, all of the, you know, expensive art hanging on the wall and the marble flooring, and is not shiny by any means, but maybe you have a team of very resilient folks, people with a lot of grit, people with a lot of creativity, and people who can engage with the regulators to say, we want to do something that's really innovative, but we don't know how to do it, and we're not afraid to say that we don't know how to do it. And rather than being, you know, a yes, no checkbox that then excludes a site from participating, we really need to reimagine how we're doing that selection process to begin with.
Yeah, Daniel, I fully agree with you, and I wanted to add something here. So actually, not fully agree with you. Part of it I agree, and part I'm not. So I'll tell you why. So first of all, absolutely agree that the feasibility questionnaires at the moment are not amended towards understanding the equipment of these people. And you're right, it's not about technology. It's about their willingness to change and try something new out. And actually, there is a way to identify like a side way, but if these sites have been equipped with, let's say, new types of CTMSs, new types of softwares to optimize their operations internally, that's a good sign that they're open to optimize their operations and technology. So knowing, are they already using some kind of vendors, it's good enough. The other point I wanted to bring is, again, this is my agreement here, actually, that there might be way more prepared than we think. I remember 2 years ago, or even more, I won't tell the name of the sponsor, but it's a pretty like big pharma. They decided to experiment in the decentralized clinical trial space way before COVID, and they had a partnership with a big Australian clinical research site. And they were experimenting how this would remote support and virtual actually visit would look like. And basically the site was using one of the normal softwares that we nowadays for virtual conferencing. And knowing that these sites, or in Europe, sometimes these are also like the hospitals in a way, that they're already using telehealth solutions. Even outside of the clinical trials concept, it's a good sign that they are already prepared to do something about it. And actually, they might be even more prepared than we even think.
Yeah,
Yeah,
no, I really
spot on.
like that. I was actually going to ask my question, and Raymond, you got to it, but I wanted to dive even a little bit deeper with Daniel is, have you noticed any difference in any feasibility assessments that you've experienced? Have you actually seen a change in what you were asked or what technology you were willing or comfortable to use, that signals to you that there's at least an acknowledgement from that sponsor or CRO side that, we need to expand our scope. Or like Maya said, we need to take note of, okay, you're using some telehealth modalities, noted, right? Like that's an extra piece of the feasibility. Or has it stayed pretty consistent?
Is that for Raymond or me?
That's for you.
Oh.
Or Raymond. That's
I don't
for
fill in
anyone.
the feasibility questionnaires.
I was gonna say that's everyone, but I'm guessing Daniel fills out the most questionnaires amongst us.
Yeah, so it's a great question, because anytime a feasibility questionnaire comes through our desks here at Macro, we have a bit of a group huddle and we look at the questionnaire and we go, okay, we know what we can answer off the bat, but some of these questions require a little bit more context and color in of course, because it really depends on the PI's personality, the PI's approach to things, and how they want to conduct things. I'll tell you, one of the things that I have noticed almost immediately, first question that's coming up is, can your site accommodate remote monitoring? It's one of the almost like the first questions in the COVID era is, can your site accommodate for remote monitoring? The second question that I get asked in feasibility is, what contingencies does the site have in the event of a shutdown? And then the third question that I have as well that comes up in the feasibility questionnaire is, are you allowing, if on-site monitoring is required, what type of policies do you have in place to facilitate that? Because there are certain elements of the monitoring process that is still taking some time to iron out all the kinks, and so there's some degree of on-site monitoring. As an aside, I always talk to the monitors on the study and I say offline, are you comfortable getting on that plane? Do you want to do this? Because my approach to how I do clinical trials is how do we best leverage the emotional intelligence of folks and really leverage on how to motivate and just bolster everybody's work, right? So if the monitor feels pushed to do on-site remote monitoring and they're not comfortable, and I get any kind of that signaling, that I have no problem signaling to the sponsor, the CRO, that as an institution, we will push back, right? We will not facilitate on-site remote monitoring. And what I've seen is that tends to strengthen the relationship immensely with our monitor and on-site study coordinator. And guess what? The outcomes are the exact same. So sometimes we need to just do a little bit of a ebb and flow and a push and read between the lines there. And in the site feasibility questionnaire process, I tend to want to look thoroughly in between those line items of those questionnaires for those signals as well.
Well, and I think that's a great segue to one of the questions we received from our great audience in advance that talked about, so as we're talking through these different angles and these different pivots, what is key for the sponsors to understand as they negotiate a site budget as a part of the feasibility when some type of decentralized trial is on the table, right? And they're assessing all of this. What, bird's eye view, what do we want the sponsor to know? What do they need to be thinking that they may not?
Yeah, I mean, I think I don't know if the sponsors have fully thought it through, but I think the site should feel empowered to request reimbursement for services that add value to the sponsor. So our a lot of our clients try to pass through the cost of our technology, and I can sort of understand why a sponsor would say, okay, that's your operating cost. But if a site is saying, okay, I'm going to upload our documents so to facilitate monitoring, and I'm going to enable 24/7 on-demand monitoring, which by the way means that we're subject to queries at different times. It's harder for us to plan, so it has an operational impact on us, and therefore the cost to us to deliver this value to you is X, and here are the components of it. I think that's a very legitimate ask from the site perspective, and I think sponsors should consider that. On the flip side, I think sponsors should maybe look at their monitoring budgets and make sure there's some variability built in there, because I've heard stories where the CRO's monitoring budget, inclusive of travel, has already been fixed. Well, okay, why would you in this day and age have a fixed travel budget? That doesn't make any sense. I would have the travel component be variable, because guess what? If the site is going to say, I can deliver the work to you, you can save the cost of delivering a human to our site. As a sponsor, I'd be very happy to say, okay, my travel budget goes down, my site budget goes up. It doesn't matter. I'm within the overall budget. I don't care who delivers the value, but either way, I realize that's the cost of doing business. So maybe not lock themselves too rigidly into a cost structure that prevents them from being flexible as conditions arise.
Yes, we weren't kidding. Kool-Aid and Spoon via our LinkedIn post about stirring up some controversial topics. But here's one big one that anytime I see it come across, I have to take a deep breath, walk away, and come back and strategize the approach there. Fair market value. Okay.
Mm.
Um, big button for me because guess what? The market wasn't fair to begin with. Well, let's just start there. Okay. The market wasn't fair to begin with. Then you introduce COVID-19 and you're really exploiting the great differences of saying, you cannot remunerate a trial, a high performing trial that has all of the bells and whistles and the technologies and the CTMS and the capabilities and the talent. Let me focus on the talent with a site in another state that is underperforming, that's overworked, that's overstressed, that is not supporting their coordinators, that has a staff turnover rate of less than a year. You cannot put those on the same plane and say to a site owner or a site director, you cannot look them really straight in the eye and say, well, our investigator database said that you're beyond the top tier of that fair market value, and so we're gonna reject that cost. We really need to take a step back here, and one of our colleagues, Deborah, who I know Edie's collaborated with, will also probably agree there that it's not so much fair market value as much as it's defensible value about what you're offering, the value of what you're offering, and you just simply can't compare apples and oranges. Yes, the trial is the same. Yes, the protocol is the same. Yes, the goals are the same. But the way in which you're going to deliver that and the efficiency in which you're going to do that and the technology and the robustness of the regulatory compliance that sites can deliver need to be baked into those costs. And the question was, what should sponsors be thinking of, right, Edie? Because I want to be mindful of
Yeah,
being
as
pointed here.
far as budgets, like what do we want sponsors to know when they're looking at site budgets for that decentralized trial, with all the different
Yeah,
modalities?
and I think maybe really asking themselves, what is it that we're going to value, and how much value, what's the value proposition of sites delivering that? And I think we need to back off of, and I think that maybe these databases of investigator payments should be helpful in indicating a general direction with site budgets, but they shouldn't be the barometer. They shouldn't be the actual measure by which all sites are expected to measure and abide by, because truly, I have a very hard time with fair market value, as you can see. It's a hot button for me.
Yeah,
That's
I can actually say something else like here, just like really quickly.
I was like,
First,
yeah, I know we're trying to move to the next topic. Go ahead, Maya.
uh, the thing is that a lot of the elements that were already overwhelming sites prior to COVID and prior to the centralized clinical trials were already there. I remember the post of the Society of Clinical Research Sites explaining that sites are like kind of like deciding not to go and like not like after the first clinical trial 50% or even more decide to no longer do any clinical trials. That's a big percentage. And you ask why? Well, because they just like fail with earning money, and actually not just earning like making revenue, but actually like be like even, right? So I think that it shouldn't be about putting more cost on the sponsor, trying to balance the cost. But I agree with Daniel, it's about the value that you're getting in the end of the day. If it's a better clinical trial, if it's a quicker patient recruitment, if it's better data, then that's what the sponsor actually need.
Thank you guys so much. This is such an important topic. I know, I had one other question on the agenda about just selfishly, because I'm regulatory and I'm compliance, I always want to ask, and this is a simple one because I know we're running out of time here for this topic, but I didn't know how much, given that I know I assist sites, but I'm not fully in-house at the site level. Was the guidance and flexibility, whether it's EMA, whether it's FDA, did that have an impact, right? And I know we're going to discuss the actual guidance and the actual compliance in a later section, but I mean it more as did you feel like you had support as you navigated some of these changed feasibility environments by your regulatory agencies? Did you feel like you didn't, or did you frankly feel like it didn't matter, right? Like it's an irrelevant point here?
I personally think that all the amendments that the regulatory bodies did were definitely not towards feasibility and the planning of clinical trials. It was mainly to do how do we ensure the safety of patients that are within clinical trials during the pandemic times. And kind of like a lot of these elements, we can see the long-term effect, obviously, even after the pandemic. So I don't really see, and maybe I'm wrong, but from
No,
what I
I agree, and that's kind of why I asked it. Honestly, it's an interesting area that is so incredibly, to me, vital to the long-term compliance and conduct of research that goes on, and it has so much to do with kickstarting the process that we're going to walk through today. And yet we don't have a lot of regulatory flex in it or holding. And so I always wonder if that's a benefit, if that actually gives you more flexibility, or if it would help, right, to have a little bit more regulatory there. Another topic, another day.
Yeah, I personally felt that it was a pinch performative in terms of, oh my God, we're under a lot of pressure. Sites need something. You're the FDA. These are the regulators. Let's issue something. And the issuance of it was the part that felt a little performative, because when you do a deep dive, you're left walking away and going, okay, well, how do we operationalize this? That's when folks like myself get with Edie and say, we need to button this up and actually SOPify it, and figure out how we're actually going to do it.
Yeah. And that's what I find too. That's totally what I find. Well, thanks, guys. This is a great topic. I know we're going to move on and let Raymond talk about our next topic now.